Hello, everyone, and welcome to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's Aviation Outlook webinar. We're glad you could join us. I'm Alan Stolzer, Dean of the College of Aviation. This week, across the university, from 130 classrooms around the world and on campuses in Singapore, Prescott, Arizona, and here in Daytona Beach, Florida, we are celebrating the history and accomplishments of aviation heroes, leaders, trailblazers, and dreamers during Aviation Week with special programs and events on our campuses, including 2 special Aviation Outlook webinars. This Thursday night, April 15th, our guest is Bonnie Simi with Joby Aviation. Joby is building pioneering vertical takeoff and landing electric aircraft, and in 2024 plans to launch an aerial ride-sharing service. Our guest for tonight's Aviation Outlook is a great friend of Embry-Riddle and the stuff of legends, Erik Lindbergh. Erik is indeed the grandson of Charles Lindberg. He is an artist, adventurer, entrepreneur, and avid pilot, and holds commercial, instrument, flight instructor, and glider ratings. In 1996, he helped launch the Xprize Foundation, and the first $10 million Xprize that was awarded helped jumpstart the private spaceflight industry. Erik serves as chairman of the board of the Charles and Ann Morrow Lindbergh Foundation, which is preparing to celebrate the 100th anniversary of his grandfather's historic flight in the Spirit of St. Louis in May of 2027. Erik and his wife Lynn also co-host the Lindbergh's podcast, focusing on second chances in life. Erik has also been one of the industry leaders in advocating for and accelerating the development of the electric aircraft industry. He is co-founder and executive chairman of VerdeGo Aero, which provides powertrain systems and engineering services to the emerging electric aircraft industry. Vertigo Aero is also our partner at Embry-Riddle's John Mica Engineering and Aerospace Innovation Complex, working with our faculty, staff, and students to develop and commercialize patent-pending technology designed to mitigate electric aircraft propeller noise. And we will talk to Erik about this and much, much more. Erik Lindbergh, it's good to see you again, and welcome to Aviation Outlook.
Thanks for having me, Alan. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate you joining us, especially this week. We're excited about Aviation Week, and we just couldn't imagine a better guest to kick us off for this celebration. So you are the executive chairman of VerdeGo Aero, a company that is doing some really interesting and, quite frankly, groundbreaking things in aviation. Can you share a bit about the company and its role in transforming aviation?
Yeah, thanks. I think electric propulsion is the future of transportation, most every form of transportation, and aviation is one of the harder forms of transportation because we're mass constrained. So there is a bit of the challenge. I saw my first electric aircraft prototype in 2008 and thought, oh, this solves some of the inherent challenges that we're facing in aviation of fuel burn, emissions, noise, and cost. And I thought this industry needs to, promote itself. It needs to come to fruition. So I started doing, giving prizes for development in electric aircraft, and around that time met Dr. Pat Anderson, who ran the Eagle Flight Research Center down at Embry-Riddle. We were working on the 100 low lead fuel issue, and then I got to know his team that was building the Eco Eagle for the NASA Green Flight Challenge, and the Lindbergh Foundation was giving the Quietest Aircraft Prize, and we got together for that. And I realized that Pat was one of the smartest people that I knew in aviation. And as we kept working together and touching these bleeding edge, if you will, aircraft technologies, we saw that we had all the technology for a flying car, if you will.
Mhm.
A lot of people hate that term, but an electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. And we recruited Eric Barch, and the three of us really formed VerdeGo Aero. And our purpose is to really develop electric aircraft of all types.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of interest in eVTOL, advanced air mobility aircraft right now. And Vertigo has decided to focus on developing electric and hybrid electric propulsion systems for eVTOL aircraft instead of really developing the entire vehicle. Uh, Talk to us a little bit more about your efforts and the success that Vertigo has had thus far.
Right. Well, we came out with an aircraft design and noticed there was a huge amount of competition, some of whom had already received a lot of money. And the biggest issue in electric flight is the amount of energy that you can pull out of a battery. So we saw that there was a huge market to provide enough electrons to the competitors in this industry. So we turned them all into our customers and said, we're going to build these hybrid electric propulsion systems. And hybrid is really what we see as the bridge to all electric. This is the way that we're going to get to market. And in many different categories and classes of aircraft. So not just eVTOL, for example, but conventional takeoff with distributed electric propulsion arrays across the wing or wherever you need thrust on an aircraft. That's really the revolutionary promise of electrics, is that you don't have to have complicated transmissions and mechanical systems to deliver thrust. So it's opened up airframe design to putting thrust wherever you need it for that particular mission. And so now that we've got customers in eVTOL, cargo, conventional takeoff and landing, even lighter than air. And we see this as the bridge to get to electric flight. And once the energy storage and release, or batteries, gain enough energy on board, then we can transition from a hybrid system over to an all electric system. And that sort of gives us a future-proof, a path to market and a future-proof method of staying on top of the market.
Yeah, it becomes sustainable. I like what you said. It's you made them all your customers. That really sounds like a stroke of genius to make that happen. So well done.
Thank you. It was a hard choice to let go of our baby, if you will. That was this beautiful aircraft design, but it was the right choice. And for many reasons, the market has been, looking for, let's say, cosmic breakthroughs. And the cosmic breakthrough would be an all-electric aircraft that can do robust commercial missions. The problem with that is, of course, the batteries don't hold nearly as much energy as a gallon of gas or Jet A. And you need the infrastructure of, for example, if you're going to develop the eVTOL market, you need grid level improvements to your heliports or your vertiports. So you need to have tons of electricity flowing into each one of those in order to charge your aircraft. And we decided we wanted to get to market first and develop those robust 4 or 5 back-to-back missions during peak traffic times, and then go out and refuel using fuel technologies that we already have, like Jet A could be in a fuel truck, or it could be in an existing facility. But we saw that as a faster way to market, to be able to really get the operational data sets and build those thriving markets.
Yeah, very good. Eric, you seem to bring the same level of passion and dedication to aviation that your grandfather, Charles Lindberg, had throughout his life. This webinar is actually being held during Aviation Week, and that's an event for us that celebrates the history and accomplishments in aviation. It's hard to believe that your grandfather was the first person to fly nonstop across the Atlantic in 1927 in a custom-built single-engine airplane. He was only 25 years old when that flight occurred. Tell us a bit about that incredible 33 and a half hour journey from your perspective as an aviator and his grandson.
Yeah, there is so much about it that's historic um, and really amazing. But I guess one thing that really stands out is that he flew across the Atlantic with a vision to show the world what aviation could be used for, commercial purposes. And the carrot to fly across was this prize, the Orteig Prize. And a gentleman by the name of Raymond Orteig in 1919 put up a $25,000 prize for the first flights between New York and Paris in either direction. I think the instructions were all other details in your care. So that's what you had to do. Very simple. And 7 teams spent $400,000 trying to win that $25,000 prize. So he leveraged his money by a factor of 16, and all that research and development went into long distance air travel. And within 6 months of his flight, the number of pilots in America tripled and the number of licensed planes quadrupled. That's really extraordinary amount of growth that happened. So it really illustrates the power of, one, prize philanthropy, and two, a breakthrough moment in history, showing the world really what was possible. And shortly thereafter, there were, commercial companies giving flights, passengers. I like to say that before my grandfather flew across the Atlantic, people who flew in airplanes were called barnstormers and daredevils. And they often lost their lives in that pursuit. And after he flew across the Atlantic, people who flew in airplanes were called pilots and passengers. And it was a shift in the world's perspective about what aviation could be used for. And that lesson has sort of guided me much of my life. And it illustrated what we were trying to do with the Xprize. And today with Forever Flight Alliance, some of the programs that I'm working on today in aviation, and really using prize philanthropy to help break those barriers down.
Do you imagine that he understood the impact he was having when he made that flight?
No way. Yeah, I think, in fact, he wrote about it I think in The Spirit of St. Louis, he said it was like lighting a match to a bonfire. He really was not prepared for the level of attention that was paid to him. He thought he'd have to sort of find some aviator and bunk down in some farmer's house in Paris or something like that, when the reality was quite different. Hundreds of thousands of people showed up, and I think it was at the perfect time on the planet when communications basically spanned the globe within seconds with radio and telegraph, and the world really caught up and was in this tension of, is he going to make it or not? He was seen partway across, and then he was seen off the coast of Ireland, and that built the excitement. And so I think he was incredibly unprepared for that, and it was an amazing effect that it had on his life and on aviation as an industry. And it also it was hard on him to be thrust into the spotlight like that, unlike anybody in history to date. And that was very intense for him.
Biographer A. Scott Berg described it as he was the first modern media superstar. And I think about that quote, and I think that's pretty accurate. And, these days we have over 1,300 flights crossing the Atlantic between North America and Europe every day. For Charles Lindbergh, that desire and commitment to advance aviation was always much more important to him than the accolades that came with that important milestone. And I want to get to the prize philanthropy you mentioned and some of your own experiences, but I think our audience would be eager to learn about your grandfather's fascinating life and the similar path that you have taken in terms of advancing aviation and aerospace. What do you see as the parallels there between what you're doing and what he did?
Yeah, it's funny. I think he sort of accidentally, touched off this bonfire, if you will, and aviation was at an inflection point where it would grow rapidly and it would insert itself into, all facets of life and into the industry that we know today. Um, he was incredibly involved in the way that the airline industry developed across the United States and across the globe with his affiliations with Pan Am and the Air Force Academy and the military. Um, he, I just saw the first color footage shot in World War II at the Mayo Clinic of him testing a centrifugal, um, one of these things you run around in a circle until you pass out. They were testing these centrifuges and the limits of human endurance, and he was actually strapped into that. So the first color footage I've seen of him, and some of the first color footage known, in the U.S. And also, he was there refining high altitude bailout procedures and the procedures for using oxygen. And I actually have a little a little carved wooden disc with two tubes on the end, and it says P39, I think it was, and the date on it, and that was his personal mouth tube that he was using for the oxygen system that they were testing. And it turns out all the aviators carved their own because they didn't want to, share with the other aviators their own personal, sort of grip it in your teeth and breathe the oxygen through that. So he was involved in a great number of, let me just say, he was curious, insatiably curious, and always, looking for improvements, whether it was to a flashlight or an aircraft or a fuel system, or a way of doing something that enabled him to sort of look into the future and see what was coming and see where to apply himself to create solutions for the future. And I think, if anything, that's rubbed off on me. Some of it, I think, is hereditary, and I'll see problems with things and I want to come up with a solution. And some of it is environmental. Once you start really investigating these things, it becomes easier, and you start to see. And then he had access to people, the leading minds of his day for generations all around the world. He could have access to anybody, really. So he did investigate those things. And his life was filled with innovation. We didn't really call it that back then, but now we do. And entrepreneurship. And that is, turning these innovations into commercial successes. And I think, that's been a great beacon for me in my life, and maybe a little bit of a hassle because it's compulsive. I don't think either of us could really control that. When we see a good idea, we want to see it come to fruition. So we jump in and try to see what levers we can push, what buttons we can push to help bring those innovations to commercial success.
Yeah, and many people, when they think about Charles Lindbergh, they think about the innovations in aviation, but he was very interested in other areas. The environment and medicine are two of those areas,
Yeah.
aren't they?
Huge. He worked with a doctor named Alexis Carrel, and Carrel was working, I think, at the Rockefeller Institute in New York, and working on this thing he called the perfusion pump, which was designed to try to keep organs alive outside, or human tissues alive outside of the human body. And his work in this area started because my grandmother, who he married, had a sister, and his sister my grandmother's sister, had a heart defect and eventually died from it. And he thought, with all of science, why can't we solve this and keep these people alive? And that sort of work with Dr. Carell morphed into the heart-lung machine that keeps people alive today. Another example would be he read about and heard about this crazy moon man who was Dr. Robert Goddard, who was always getting in the press for blowing up rockets, much like our modern day Elon Musk. You know, he was a little bit crazy moon man, right? And yet he was doing this breakthrough work in liquid fueled rocketry that my grandfather recognized was incredibly important. And so he got support from his friend Harry Guggenheim, and they were able to get Goddard set up down in New Mexico, and he became, really known as the father of liquid fueled rocketry, which led to our space program. Mm-hmm. So those are just a couple of examples, and you can find more if you do a little research. And I'll also say that as we approach the 100th anniversary of my grandfather's flight, we're doing a lot of research and thinking about what we're going to do for the 100th anniversary. That's in just over 6 years from now, and how we're going to celebrate that. And one of the things we're doing is having a well-known author, an aerospace author, who is researching into that innovation ecosystem that both of my grandparents sort of worked in, and how that affected people like Neil Armstrong and Jimmy Doolittle and Dr. Sylvia Earle and Bertrand Piccard and so forth, how that ecosystem has sort of spread like ripples across a pond and is still alive and rippling today. And that's pretty exciting to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't wait to hear more about what those plans are for the 100-year celebration. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous because we don't have much time and we have grand plans, but I also am thankful that we have 6 years. I think when I flew across the Atlantic in 2002 on the 75th anniversary, we started with a year and a half of time, and we could have done much better with a little more time.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that flight in a few minutes, but a couple minutes ago, you mentioned the Xprize. I wanted to give our audience a little about that as well. You helped launch that initiative during the mid-1990s. And that foundation, the Xprize Foundation, uses incentive competitions, much like the one your grandfather won, which was the Orteig Prize, as we mentioned, to help address some of the most important challenges in our lifetime. Can you tell us a bit about the important work that the Xprize Foundation is doing?
Yeah, well, I think the Xprize was founded in 1996 under the Arch in St. Louis, and we had Dan Golden, the head of NASA, and about 20 astronauts, including some Apollo astronauts, to give us super credibility, if you will, when we launched. And the original Xprize was a $10 million prize for the first privately manned spaceship that could send the equal weight and mass of 3 people into space, return safely, and do it again within 2 weeks. And so the prize rules were set up essentially to make sure that we could crowdsource from crazy guys working in their garage, like Burt Rutan, who could come up with a space launch vehicle that would be reusable and then eventually scale into commercial craft. And by crowdsourcing it, we'd get all this research and development into space travel. And it worked. Burt Rutan and Mojave Aerospace Ventures, that was his joint venture with Paul Allen, won the prize. And Mike Melville, too old to fly for the airlines, but he could fly into space in an untested rocket ship, won the Xprize. And that, it did 2 things. It jump-started the private spaceflight industry that we now have, that where Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and Elon Musk are all vying to build these companies that'll take you and I into space, or send cargo or satellites into space. And it also jump-started the prize philanthropy industry. And so it put the Xprize Foundation on the map, and we decided, well, we need to do more prizes. What are we going to do in the future? And so we're sitting around in this board meeting, and I've been kind of hammering on, we need to do closed loop living systems so that we can figure out how to live in space sustainably, because we could probably translate that technology here to the planet Earth, right? If we need help in this one closed loop living system that we have, Spaceship Earth. But we really created this organization that addresses the grand challenges facing humanity. And I just got a notice today that we have something called the Avatar Prize, and this is to deliver remote presence of a person, an activity, or something like that. I'm not quite getting the terminology right, but essentially so that you could operate on a human in another country, or you could visit another country and experience it and visit another person. So it's that, and it was backed by ANA. This is the Japanese airline, All Nippon Airways. They asked us the question a few years ago, how could an airline company such as ourselves be disrupted, or what would interrupt travel? And we thought, well, augmented or virtual reality could do that. And we ended up forming a partnership to really accelerate that and develop a business around that, because they saw they may need to adapt to this. And what better way to do that than to develop this technology? So that's one of the prizes that we're working on. We've done an automotive efficiency Xprize. We did an oil spill cleanup prize. We're now doing a Feed the Next Billion prize. We've got a Better Mask prize for those of us who hate wearing masks but don't want to get sick. How do you make a mask that's actually wearable and functional? So it's really been an extraordinary journey, not just to launch the private spaceflight industry that we're seeing develop today, but the prize philanthropy industry that addresses these challenges that aren't really being addressed by big industry or governments.
Incredible work.
Yeah, it's
Congratulations, man.
incredibly exciting, and it gives you hope when you're sitting around in a room full of people that includes sometimes, well, he doesn't really come to our meetings anymore, Larry Page or Elon Musk or Richard Branson. Those guys not only have great ideas, but they have the money to apply a prize to it. And that's a very inexpensive way to leverage all the R&D to come up with a solution. So it's really brilliant. Even NASA said, oh, wow. And they put through legislation so that they could do Centennial Challenge prizes. And so that now governments can use prizes because it's such an efficient way to solve problems. So that's just been an amazing journey.
It's really, really important work that you're involved in. And these programs such as Xprize are so impactful. But it sounds like you're having a heck of a lot of fun along the way, being involved in these.
I'll tell you what, I've had a very interesting life, and that may be a little bit of a curse because sometimes they're really hard. At the original Xprize, we should have failed. If you read Julian Guthrie's book, How to Make a Spaceship, you'll see how many times we nearly failed, but the payoff was huge. So that risk and reward benefit, and I'll say, when we started VerdeGo Aero, we knew this is a startup. It's a startup in aviation, which is even tougher. And we're going to have to build ourselves in a way that we optimize our chances of being a successful business. We pivot when needed, and we aim for a high enough, a risky enough bar that we're gonna change the way the world moves around the planet, but in a safe enough way that we can make this business successful. Mm-hmm. And so that's the fun, the challenge, the day-to-day, oh my God, I can't wait to go into work because we're doing really exciting stuff. And that's I guess the whole lot of fun, but occasionally it gets scary and it gets very real.
I would imagine. but some of this, some of what you're describing is so game changing. And I know a lot of what you've been involved in has been really, it relates to the future of commercial space travel as well, not only aviation and other areas, but commercial space. You mentioned Musk earlier. How do you see that industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's a great question because I think when we started Xprize, we had this overall goal of creating a vibrant launch industry that would take self-loading carbon-based payloads, humans, and send them up into space for money and deliver payloads like satellites. And it took a lot longer to develop than we thought. But I think the promise is still there. And now you're seeing Musk delivering Starlink satellites, and I think that the whole sort of delivery of broadband from space, and then Jeff Bezos' idea of doing heavy manufacturing in space and taking it off of the Earth so there's less impact on the Earth and we're just bringing these materials down from space. Those are grand visions that we wanted to happen. We saw and we sort of wanted to happen. I think Heinlein talks about it in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, that you could lob raw materials from the moon down the gravity well to the Earth. And I think we're on our way. It's just really hard, and because spaceflight is hard and expensive, and things blow up occasionally. And it's really good that Musk is able to blow these things up, because NASA couldn't afford to do that. Their budgets would be slashed if they blew up rockets regularly. They did that in the early days, but that was when that risk was tolerable. It became no longer tolerable, and we had to make it safe, right? And so it's good that we've got it in the hands of private industry now to take those risks. It was incredibly empowering to be a part of a small team of people that got Spaceship One hanging in the Air and Space Museum next to my grandfather's plane, the Spirit of St. Louis. And when I look at that, I went, I'm not really a rocket scientist. These guys talk way above my head, orbital mechanics and ISP and all these things. I'm really an aviator. And so as I looked at that and thought about what we did, I thought, I want to take those lessons that we learned in space flight and apply them to aviation. What are the challenges that we're facing, especially general aviation, which is my passion. I love to fly small airplanes. Big airplanes, cool, they're transportation. But I love to fly in small airplanes, and we make noise and we burn fuel and we have carbon emissions. How do we make this more sustainable? And so I started applying prize philanthropy to aviation. And that's what led me into electric flight and led me down this pathway. And again, it's taken a lot longer than I thought it would. It's been harder than I thought it would be. But now this industry is really developing. And I forget where we started on the beginning of this, sort of trajectory of this conversation, but each step has sort of led me to the next step. And that is an exploration that I just love, and it feeds me. And figuring out where we're going to apply our hybrid electric propulsion systems with VerdeGo Aero, for example, is a great delight, because we now have customers coming to us with applications that we never foresaw. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of like a magical discovery.
That's tremendous. So many applications for that technology, not only in the areas that you intend to provide it, but the fact that it's going to be sort of exportable to other industries really makes it even doubly exciting in my view.
Yeah, I think if we can do it in aviation, we can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
We can apply this technology anywhere. It may take longer, it may be harder, but both space flight and aviation are mass constrained. The more weight we carry, the more energy we need to carry. And it's a negative feedback loop. So we have to be really smart about it. But that means that if we can apply it here, we can apply it anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So we mentioned this earlier, but in 2002, and I want to focus on this a little bit, you decided to commemorate the 75th anniversary of your grandfather's flight by flying a Lancair Columbia 300 airplane from New York to Paris. I should note that your flight took 17 hours and 10 minutes, roughly half the time of your grandfather's journey. Erik, that's a pretty magnificent achievement in itself. And I'd just like to focus on that with you for a minute. Can you share a little about that journey across the Atlantic, what that was like and what that meant to you?
Yeah, I think as a pilot, it was the longest flight I've ever taken, 17 hours. I think it was 7 minutes, but that was almost 20 years ago. It was an extraordinary mission. And when I say mission, I mean, my mission was to survive that flight. I did not want to die. So, and some guy had done it 75 years earlier, my grandfather. So I wasn't trying to prove anything necessarily for aviation. I was trying to get people to use that milestone, the 75th anniversary, to look at the future of flight and Xprize. And that worked. So we got raised a couple $1 million in both cash and in kind, and 500 million media impressions. That came before social media. So that was significant. And it all focused on the Xprize, and it kept the Xprize alive at a time when we were struggling. We'd been in operation for 6-7 years, and we're running out of money and so forth. So it was one of those moments when we saved the Xprize. And from a personal perspective, it was risky. So the mission was risky, right? That is, how do you keep yourself alive flying an airplane through lots of weather that you could kind of forecast, but that's a long period of time to fly because it changes. And then there was sort of a personal risk standpoint, and that was from the point of impact on my family, and really the legacy that my grandfather left, if you can imagine him going, as we talked about, from a farm boy airmail pilot to the global media superstar that Scott Berg talked about, it changed his life. And he then, if you think about it, was asked about that flight everywhere he went for the rest of his life.
Right.
And his patent answer, if you asked him about the flight, was to read the book. And that's why he wrote the first book, We, and then he wrote The Spirit of St. Louis in 1953, I think, to really set that down on paper, and so everybody could see it. So he didn't have to answer that question anymore. So I think he spent the rest of his life trying to get away from that, and so he could focus on, how do you save the whales, for example, or the monkey-eating eagle in the Philippines, and these passions that he then became involved with. And so from that point, I think I was going up against the family in a way that wanted to ignore that or let it lie and let it be. And I recognized at some point on the planning on this, because I was more or less the only, active pilot in the family, that I needed to break through that barrier. And it was a Lindbergh phobia. I had this phobia of Lindbergh stuff that I had to break through. And so it was both a mission that I needed to, plan the fuel and the winds and the weather and take all the risk I could out of it. But it was also that I needed to break through this barrier in the family that I think was holding me back in different ways. And so that was a personal journey as well. And I think I'll just share with you a little aside. One of the failures we had on the flight was after I coasted out from Newfoundland, I ran out of VHF radio contact, so I could no longer talk on the regular radio. And then my satellite phone went down, and I couldn't contact Xprize mission control at the St. Louis Science Center. And so I was basically talking to no one, but the aircraft was operating properly. And I was, most of the way through my mission. I probably still had 7 hours to go. And the sun was going down behind me, so it was getting dusky, and I saw my first icebergs floating around and went, oh, I really, it took not being in communication and not talking to anyone, and time to contemplate, which I think my grandfather had a lot of time to contemplate, that I really felt like, oh, then I was sort of cradled in the same sky that he was, and it enabled me to sort of touch on that. But then there was a storm up ahead, and I got through on the satellite phone, and then I was talking to the airliners up above, and I had the storm to navigate through, and it got busy again. So it was really, I think I was very preoccupied with the mission and surviving and making sure the flight went well, and giving all my mechanical updates to mission control. But that was that moment when I really connected with that legacy, and realizing, oh my God, what he did was so much harder and yet so much simpler.
Really fascinating the way you just explained that. And cradled in the same air. That's such a powerful thing. I appreciate you sharing that with us. So you made it over and you landed at Le Bourget Airport. What sorts of feelings and thoughts were running through your head at that time? That had to be a magnificent experience.
Well, I guess maybe it makes sense to tell you a little story about another difficulty. As I approached France, I knew I was going to make land. That was a big thing, because I didn't, I trained to ditch in the ocean, I did sea survival training and ditching and egress training. But it felt really good to hit the coast of Europe. And then the difficulty came when I got closer, and I had a French air traffic controller with a really thick accent, or maybe it was just my ears. I don't know, but he rerouted me from my flight, and he rerouted me right over the top of Charles de Gaulle to this identifier, to this identifier, to this identifier, and that one. And he used all the, the acronyms, the 3-letter identifiers. And I didn't know what they were, and I couldn't hear him. I had to ask him 4 times to repeat himself. And he got upset with me, and I could hear it in his voice. And I said, hey, I just want to make it. And I think then he go, oh, okay, I will spell it out to you. I think he just got it. Then I'd been flying for 15, 16 hours. And I was really just trying to get it correctly so that I could then make my instrument approach, because it was IMC. I think the ceiling was maybe 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet. So it wasn't super low. So, but it was one of those stressful things that came towards the end of the flight that I thought, what am I going to do? And I had flown that in that area on flight simulator, so I had sort of what was there, but I'd never got that approach. So that was just a very interesting aside. And then I got down, and I made my approach, and I was talking to, I had air traffic control in one ear, and then I had mission control in the other ear. And I was talking to Mike Schrader from Lance Air. They built the plane, and he was talking me through my instrument approach as I was, saying yes on the final approach and so forth to the air traffic control. So it was very interesting. And I got down, and I landed the plane, and I taxied up, and there was a follow me car, and they were stopped there waiting for my clearance. And I thought, I made it, I survived, I landed. And it was a good landing too. I was worried I was going to bounce it in or something.
You were probably fatigued at that point, were you?
Yeah, I was fatigued, but I was really excited. but so then I went through and I started cleaning up the airplane, the door seals and so forth. And I called ground control and permission to taxi to the museum. And I didn't hear anything, and I kept cleaning up the plane, and then I got looking around going, I think it's over there. And I didn't hear back. And so I called again, and then I went, oh, I made a mistake. I forgot to switch to COM2. So I had it all set, and I didn't switch in there. November 142 Lima Charlie, how do you read? I was broadcasting, but I couldn't hear their response. And I made, the most rookie mistake of forgetting to switch to the active frequency that I was, broadcasting on. But it was like, oh yes, fly the plane until you're done and you're out. I knew that as a flight instructor, as a commercial pilot, I knew that. And I just always go back to that training. What is going on? I flipped it. Okay, sorry. I had a little trouble, and I made it just fine. So it was just one of those things that it put me back in my place once I landed and was on top of the world. And that was a really good and important thing to do. So I didn't, make some other mistake or compound some mistakes.
Sure. Interesting. How did you get the extended range on the aircraft?
We put a 85-gallon tank, custom designed aluminum tank, where the rear two seats are in the aircraft, and then fully wet wings. So we used a Columbia 400. Their turbocharged model had larger fuel capacity in there, and so it was about 1,000 pounds over certificated max gross weight when I took off from New York, and that was the heaviest I'd ever taken off. So I hadn't tested it at that fuel weight, because then you'd have to fly for 10 hours before you're legal to land, or something like that. And so it was an experience. And that just the taxiing with all that fuel out in the wings, the plane was going on the taxiway, and we had beefed up tires, and it was a very interesting mission that I think test pilots would be familiar with, but I wasn't really a test pilot, and yet I was testing these things.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know a ton of planning had to go into getting ready for that flight. I do hope you got more sleep than your grandfather did the night before his flight, but I suspect you were pretty keyed up for it.
Yeah, and I saw that as one of his biggest risk factors. So, and I think he would say the same thing. He actually hallucinated in the cockpit. He writes about that, seeing apparitions and fighting against sleep. Yep. And so I got a good 7 hours of sleep the night before. I was lucky to have people like John and Martha King who really took an interest and helped me out. And one of the things they did was, they went and got me some charts that I didn't have, that I wasn't really thinking about, and said, well, what if you end up in Ireland? Don't you need some charts for Ireland? And so they did little things like that for me, and they just recognized that this was a big deal. There was a lot of moving parts, and that I needed to focus on surviving the flight, which was obviously the prime directive. And they did things like I got these sandwiches brought to the hotel where I was staying, and they put mustard on them. and they were nice enough to like go, oh yeah, it's all just the practical things are, you need to stay focused. And so I just will be forever thankful to those people, not just John and Martha, but others that really stepped in and helped make that mission a success.
Yeah. I heard that at the press conference after the flight, you said that you did it in half the time and ate twice as much. A funny quote.
Well, I am a funny guy. I like to bring humor to whatever I do, because often it's as serious as a heart attack, or the consequences, the exposure, et cetera, are serious. And so I love to bring humor into life. And that was a humorous piece. I think doing it in half the time was sort of an idea, how do we bridge the past of my grandfather's flight to the state of the art today, and then link it to the future? And how do we build towards that future that we want to see? How do we create that future? Because if we're a passenger, that's fine. We can wait for the future, but I'm a pilot and I want to help create that future. So I think that's the statement of saying I ate twice as much if I did it in half the time. But imagine what we could do, for example, in 2027 on the 100th anniversary. Can we fly not just an electric aircraft, but a practical aircraft, one that could carry passengers or cargo across the Atlantic? So those are the questions I'm asking right now that, hopefully will drive us in that direction, that will make another meaningful breakthrough at a time when the world is paying attention and they can shift their perspective again about what aviation can do for us.
Yeah, you'll definitely have a big platform on that at that event. So making use of that is, I'm sure that's top of mind for you.
Yeah, we're very excited. I think the foundation is excited. We're excited to be working with all of our partners that we've pulled together, and we're really just begun. So I think if there are people or companies out there that are interested in this, we'd love to talk to you about what you can bring to the table that would help us to have sort of the biggest lever possible to create that change, because
Sure.
we have a unique opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Eric, obviously, the aviation industry really well. I guess for the benefit of our audience tonight, what makes you optimistic about the future of this industry?
Well, Alan, I think we're living in the most exciting time that I've ever seen in aviation. And I'm saying that even though we're in this sort of downturn, the COVID, pandemic aviation downturn. That's sort of the commercial aviation sector, and I think it's starting to rebound, and so that's great. But what we've seen in the electric propulsion side is that it's moving ahead faster than ever. It's actually gained momentum during the pandemic, and there's a lot more investment flowing in. We now have SPACs, or special purpose acquisition companies, that are backing some of the companies in electric flight, and it is, including Vertigo Aero, we have seen tremendous growth. And I guess what I always sort of look for, what are the barriers, what are the threats, what do we need to do? And we need to develop this technology. I think one of the things that Greg Marinac, the director of the Xprize back in '96 when we launched, and through the duration, he said during some of our fundraising presentations, if God had intended for humans to fly into space, she would have given us a lot more money. and all joking aside, it's kind of true. And if we want to see this happen, and we're now seeing space flight, and it is indeed some of the wealthiest people on the planet are putting their resources towards this industry. If we want to see aviation become clean and quiet and sustainable, we need to invest in it, and not just Vertigo or the electric technology that we're seeing, but the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we see as a big barrier, and it is the fact that to develop a series of vertiports, if you need grid level improvements to each of those vertiports in order to charge those aircraft, how do you do that? So we need investment there. Vertigo has sort of shortcut that, if you will, because we use diesel hybrid propulsion systems. So we can use Jet A or biofuels and use existing facilities or a fuel truck if you want to get 20 or 30 vertiports around a city to develop that eVTOL urban air mobility use case. So, but these are all issues that we're going to need to do, and that infrastructure piece is massive. If we're talking about, hydrogen, which has potential, I think there's also potential with ammonia that we're seeing as a no carbon fuel, zero carbon fuel. If we're going to develop that technology, we're going to need massive infrastructure improvements, not just in one country or in Europe, but all around the world. And those pieces need to be done if we're gonna create that change, and we're going to need to balance it with what we've got today, the fixed assets and the companies that we've got, that actually work today.
Mhm.
So it's I think we need a lot of forward thinking people who are willing to stick their necks out and risk taking a risk for the future if we're going to have that kind of a payoff in the future.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly appreciate all you're doing to advance the cause of this industry and electric and hybrid and so forth. You're doing some amazing work. And Erik, I can't believe how quickly this hour has disappeared. This has been such an interesting
But wait, there's
conversation.
more.
We'll have to have you back for part 2.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
But it's been really wonderful, and I know our audience got a lot of takeaways from this. So thanks so much for taking the time and joining us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And, big thank you to Embry-Riddle for all the work that you guys have done over the years, and for, really helping to germinate VerdeGo Aero. And now that we're based down at the Micaplex, it was such a great partnership there. I just have to say thank you again.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you again. Erik is a true man for all seasons, and we just touched on a few of the highlights of his life and his work in the aviation industry. You can learn more about Erik by going to his website, eriklindbergh.com. Don't forget, you can watch a recap of any of our previous webinars on Embry-Riddle's YouTube channel by going to our webpage and clicking on past presenters. That web address is erau.edu/aviation-outlook, or just Google Embry-Riddle Aviation Outlook. Our guest for the next Aviation Outlook in just a couple of days, Thursday, April 15, is Bonnie Simi, Head of Air Operations and People at Joby Aviation, a leading aviation company that is developing an all-electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that it intends to operate as a commercial passenger aircraft ride-sharing service beginning in 2024. Ms. Simi leads the development of the operating service, including flight operations, maintenance, training, safety, air carrier certification, and sustainability. She was previously the president of JetBlue Technology Ventures. She is also an airline pilot and engineer with 30 years in the aviation industry. She holds master's degrees from the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Stanford School of Engineering. But that's not all. She is also a 3-time Olympian and 10-time national champion in the sports of luge and bobsled. Our thanks once again to our good friend Erik Lindbergh, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. For the deans of the colleges of aviation and aeronautics, and for everyone here at Embry-Riddle, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you Thursday at 6 p.m. Take care.